Hi again. I got a little bit chopped off in the very last couple of words I was saying in that previous video, but you didn't miss anything. I was just going to say that in our next video, we are going to talk about sex and gender. And so that's what we're here to do today. And so these are the ascribed status topics that chapter 10 in our textbook relates to. And remember, we're talking about these ascribed statuses because of their relationship to social stratification and our socioeconomic status overall. That's based on achieved statuses. These are ascribed statuses. So, just like in our discussion of race and ethnicity, you can't use those two terms interchangeably. They're not interchangeable. Sex and gender are two additional words that I hear a lot of people in the general public misusing these. They are not interchangeable at all. They are two distinct words that we need to, as college-educated people, we need to make a distinction in our minds so that we know how to intelligently discuss them if they come up for us, in any kind of way, in our work, in our conversation, or in any other class that you might have while you're getting your degree. So let's look at sex category first. Sex is something that's based in biological category. You study anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. All of these things are guided by the sex category that someone fits into based on their internal or external sex characteristics. They are physical features like the testes, like the ovaries, like vagina, penis. These kinds of things are internal and external sex characteristics, okay? Primary or secondary sex characteristics. Now, it is important for me to stop right here and note that there are three naturally occurring, do you hear me say naturally occurring sex categories? There is no kind of third abnormal sex category. It's three naturally occurring sex categories. Male, of course, is one of them. Female, of course, is another one. I say of course because typically all of my students know about male and female, but not every one of you knows about the third naturally occurring sex category called intersex. Now, let me say that it's not just in human beings, it's in the plant kingdom and it's in the animal kingdom too. All kinds of animals, genus and species of animals, all kinds of plants have sex categories. And some plants, like the holly tree, the native tree in Arkansas, the state tree, I think it is, the holly tree, there are some trees that are female and there are some trees that are male. And the female trees make the berries and they will not make the berries unless the male tree is around to pollinate those flowers, right? So there's like a sexual reproduction that happens. If you studied biology class or botany class or whatever it is in like 7th grade, you saw a cross section of a lily flower and you saw the ovaries where the seeds are and the stamen and the pistil and the pollen, the male parts of the flower. So some plants are intersex or possessing a combination of physical features that are typically considered male or typically considered female, because that's what an intersex individual is. An intersex individual is someone who has some characteristics that are typically considered male, some characteristics that are typically considered female at the same time. Never the same total number of male and female at the same. I say never, it's statistically impossible to be a perfect set of male and a perfect set of female in the same organism. Statistically, it's impossible, but a combination of multiple features or missing parts. So for instance, male babies are born without their testes descended into their scrotum. And so sometimes later in life, when the testes are supposed to be descending, sometimes they never descend. And so that part was missing to begin with. So that individual is not entirely male. There's something called intersex. Sometimes males in puberty, their breast tissue begins to grow because males have breast tissue also. They can suffer from breast cancer, for instance. And sometimes in puberty, their breast tissue begins to grow. Now, they don't have mammary glands in the breast tissue. Mammary glands are the milk producing or the lactation producing glands that are in female breasts. So there's a female internal sex characteristic, those mammary glands that males don't typically possess, but males also don't usually grow the breasts to begin with. And so these are ways that intersex individuals can have a combination of both, or maybe an incomplete set of one, maybe more of one than another, or something like that. And this is a naturally occurring sex category in all plants and animals. There are some asexual creatures that don't really possess any of the, they maybe reproduce by cell division or something instead of through gametes. But sex is your biological category, male, female, or intersex. All three are naturally occurring sex categories. And these are ascribed statuses. These male, female, or intersex are ascribed statuses because, well, we will look at because of the dominant versus subordinate group organizations in society. So we'll look at that in a future video this week. Let's move on to gender, though, because gender is something I hear used interchangeably with sex all the time, and it's not. It overlaps, definitely has an overlap, but it's not interchangeable with sex. Sex is about your biological category. Gender is about your behaviors that you exhibit. Now, we call it a social construction because every society has norms about what males are expected to have as far as their behavior goes, and what behaviors females are expected to have. We call that masculinity and femininity. These are gender words, whereas male and female are sex words. But not every male is full on masculine, tough, rough, hairy, bodybuilder, whatever, however you describe the ultimate end of the spectrum that you would call masculinity. Not every male has those characteristics. There are degrees of masculinity. It is a spectrum, in fact, of behaviors from masculinity on one end to femininity on the other end. And just like with masculinity, not every female is sparkly pink and, frilly, or whatever the adjectives would be that you want to apply to ultra femininity. So there is a spectrum of behaviors that fits in there, and everything in between the ultimate masculine end and the ultimate feminine end of the spectrum is a gender. So there's an infinite number of genders in society, and some genders don't exist in one society and they do exist in another. Like, for instance, when I teach anthropology, one of my favorite societies to focus on is the Maasai of East Africa. They were in Tanzania and Kenya in East Africa. And for males, they have boy, like we do, for a gender category that corresponds to males. But then in between boy and adult man, they have a gender category called a warrior. And there's different behaviors associated with the warrior than there was a boy. And there's different behaviors associated with warrior than there is a married man. And so you have to go through your warrior stint where you defend the herd of cattle against people who want to steal them, against predators that want to eat them, etc. You defend the cattle and goats, and you are a warrior in that way because it's usually a fight when you're defending this. And so you have to spend a period of time in your kind of late adolescence, early 20s, where your gender category is warrior. And then you can become a man, a marriageable man. And so different behaviors are allowed in that society for warriors than married men, than boys, than elders. Elder is another gender category. And so some societies have very specific, clear-cut gender categories that we transition from in our lives that are marked by what we call rites of passage, rituals like maybe a graduation ceremony that marks the time before you were a college graduate and now the time after you're a college graduate. That formal ceremony is a ritual or a rite of passage. Some societies have rites of passage that identify you based on your gender category. Think about a quinceañera, for instance, marking the 15th birthday for females of Hispanic ethnic origin in most cases. So they were a girl, not allowed to do certain things, wear high heels, go out on dates, etc. before that quinceañera, but now they've had that quinceañera and the party and the mass and the blessing and the Holy Communion and all of this that marks a different gender category. Now you're allowed to date. Now you're allowed to be considered as wife potential in the future. And so those are behaviors that are associated with gender. Now, I am a female. As far as I know, I only ever had all of the female parts that I needed to be female, and nothing was removed before I had, surgically at birth or anything changed or anything on me in my lifetime. However, when I was a child, I did not like being female at all. I did not like having somebody tell me to sit like a lady and walk like a lady and eat like a lady and stop picking my nose or whatever I wanted to do. I was constantly being told to stop the behaviors that seemed to come naturally to me as a kid. And so I didn't like the gender imposed on me as a female when I was little. I was often called a tomboy. Now, Tom is a boy's name and boy is a male gender category of youth. But tomboy connected will tell you about a set of behaviors that are typically assigned to females who don't like this end of the spectrum. So there's infinite number of gender categories that we can talk about. A funny gender category to me, pitifully funny, I guess I would say. Y'all weren't even born yet when Arnold Schwarzenegger, who used to be a big-time bodybuilder and movie star, ran for governor of California, and he got it, by the way. And there's a famous sound clip that you can find someplace on YouTube, I'm sure, where he insulted somebody else who was running for governor or somebody who criticized him or something. He called that person a girly man. Well, man is a gender word that typically overlaps with male, adult time frame, but girly, what's that? That's like saying in the Sandlot movie that you throw like a girl. That was the worst insult, right? So gender and sex overlap. Assumptions that we have in society create that overlap. Gender fluidity is a concept that's very recent in our cultural ideology, but it's kind of a truism because we are constantly changing our gender category throughout our lives, from girl to tomboy to teenager to prissy girl, if I want to refer to myself in my 20s, to middle-aged woman. All of these different gender categories. Can I still be middle-aged? I don't have to say elderly yet, do I? I did get my AARP invitation, but I didn't join. So gender is constantly changing for me. My sex isn't, but my gender is, because there's different behaviors associated or expected of me as I transition through all the different stages of life. There's not necessarily a ritual that marks a passage. Some countries do. I have a wonderful friend from Japan, and she said that when little girls start their menstrual cycle at 11, 12, 13, that there's usually a very big party, like everybody in the apartment building has a party to celebrate it, and it's not an embarrassing thing. It's different than the way we look at this kind of event in a very personal and private event that maybe mothers and daughters celebrate, I say with air quotes, behind closed doors. But in other places, these are rituals where you have a cake and celebrate and let everybody know she's a woman now, because women have reproductive behaviors associated with them. So gender and sex overlap. They are both ascribed statuses, and they affect our position in overall social stratification that we will look at more in depth when we start talking about dominant versus subordinate groups in our next lecture. See you soon.